Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today with a fresh episode to talk to you about what continues to be, I believe, the cheapest lens in Canon's lineup. And that is the Canon RF 50mm F1.8. Now, I reviewed that lens, in depth going back a little over a year ago. And so if you want more traditional type review, you can go and check out the linkage to that. But at around $200 US, this is a lens that most people can afford. And if you can afford an R type body, then you can afford the 50mm F1.8. Now, I own one of these lenses, not because it is the best 50mm of its kind, but because it is small and compact and there is a place for it. Now, one of those places is when I travel, because it's small and easy to bring along. And so I happened to bring it on this recent trip. And so as a part of the trip, we did a day trip into Charleston, South Carolina, which is a beautiful city, great place to walk around, and a great place to do street photography. I realized on this particular trip, as those of you that have watched my, what's in my Canon kit, what's in my Sony kit, I realized that there is something that is missing out of my Canon kit. I was focusing on my review of the 100 to 500L, so I was more telephoto oriented, and maybe by now you've seen my episode where I looked at the Samyang 85mm f1.4 for portrait. I brought it along for that purpose. I brought the 50mm along for that kind of lightweight walk around type lens, and I realized that what's missing out of my kit is probably something like the 24 to 105 f4 lens, a lens that you can use as a complement, kind of general purpose lens to complement maybe something more specialized when you bring along, something I've got to rectify for the future. But it did lead me to an interesting exploration that on the day that I probably would have used something like a 24 to 105, I reached for this 50mm instead. I wasn't carrying a bag or anything, just strap. And as I walked around, of course, I took photos. It's what I do. And so I wanted to see how this lens would perform for street photography. And so today I'm going to actually take you through some photos that I took as a part of that of a variety of subjects, beautiful city, and give you some thoughts as to how a lens like this works for street. Because I do get a lot of questions about street, and I don't live in a major city, so street is a little bit less of what I do. But when I'm in a city, I do enjoy that aspect of photography and just, capturing the things that catch my eye. And so if this is a lens that people have asked me, is it suitable for street? Well, today I'm going to do my best to answer that by showing you photos and showing you where the lens excels, where it doesn't excel, and at $200, is it still worth buying and using for that application? So let's dive in and let's take a look. So as a part of this breakdown, I have divided my shots that I've chosen here into kind of different genres, some of the different things you might do as a part of, at least I would do in a walk around in a new environment like this. So part of that might be some interesting architecture, buildings and textures that just kind of caught my eye. And so here's one such shot, and you can see, taking a look here at the detail looks pretty decent. However, I will say as a focal length, I did find it a little bit restrictive. Wasn't able to always get as much as I want. Here's shooting from across the street. This isn't really the framing that I would have preferred. There's some elements that I'm not able to get in there, and so I would have preferred the 35mm type focal length. Now in this shot, things are a little bit better in that while it's maybe a little bit tight here on the corners, I was able to get most of the structure in from across the street, and I'm also quite satisfied with the amount of detail and the overall color that's here in the shot. Everything looks just fine. In this case, I was able to get most of what I wanted, but what I had to do is, rather than choose to capture the whole building, I had to isolate an ingredient here and just focus on that instead. In case of this being a larger building, I stepped back basically as much as what I could without, getting a messed up kind of framing. And I was able to get a pretty good shot, but, a shot that I'm also quite happy with the amount of detail that's in the image. Nothing really stands out there that I don't like. Now, in this case, coming back to the custom house, this is at the front facade. And so I just had to basically make a choice to frame in some of the main architectural details because I really just didn't have enough room to capture the whole building. And so it's certainly not as flexible as a zoom for a walk around. And so that's why I think that, choosing isolating details is the better choice. Even the case of this very interesting pineapple fountain, which is a feature there in Charleston, I couldn't get quite as much as I wanted without kind of involving some other negative elements, around there. So this is about as good as I got. It's okay. Now, where there's a little bit more room, obviously 50 millimeters becomes more attractive. And so some really gorgeous trees here, and a lady was wearing a nice, bright red top. And so that allowed for a nice amount of contrast there. And so this image, I think, works better because it suits the focal length a little bit better. Now, images like this is where I think 50 millimeters works great as a walk-around kind of lens. It's enough to get backgrounds a little bit defocused and to, focus on the nice bright red color of the bike. And so that I found intriguing. Also for this type of shot where I just, instead of trying to catch the whole facade, I moved over to the side and worked at just kind of capturing an interesting looking sign and, the lamps that had some nice ambiance, along with the stone front there, made for, I believe, an interesting image. Now, another shot that I enjoy doing is sometimes just kind of capturing street signs and just also to kind of mark position. So in this case, there is a rather famous row of houses that are all different pastel colors. So, obviously that's something that is not only interesting for the image sake of kind of marking the spot that some people might know, but also even for myself in returning back. It might be something that I would want to return to. Now, our negative here is shown in a limitation of this image in a high contrast scene. Definitely some color fringing that shows up here, which does kind of betray its cheaper qualities. Now, as part of walking around, in this case, there were some very interesting confectionery treats in a shop that we went into, and so it worked pretty well for that. I don't find that the detail up close here is blowing my mind or anything, but, overall, it definitely creates the mood of highlighting something and focusing the eye on that, and then a fairly decent defocused background. Here's another shot where I really liked kind of the mood of the whole setting, entrance into a little bit of a park. And again, there's both strengths and weaknesses here. Detail looks pretty good and in the wrought iron, which I enjoyed. But, obviously the fringing is a negative there, which I think does detract away from the bokeh quality. And, this isn't going to be anything like the RF 50mm F1.2 in its ability to render those backgrounds. It's a little bit busy. This worked better, and you'll see over the next few shots, I think that's where it looks to its strengths, and that's where you get a little bit closer, get the background a little bit more defocused, and it does a pretty reasonable job in that kind of situation. You can see that the bokeh looks softer, and kind of avoiding that middle distance works better. In this case, just again, it's the contrast of the the green coming through the wrought iron, and I went with a monochrome for this look, and it works pretty well. Here, just kind of, isolating some of the spring blossoms and the bokeh quality on this. That looks quite nice. And also, I think on this shot as well, where, I have a little bit of a thing for padlocks on fences. It's kind of a cliche thing, but it does really make for a really nice looking subject. And in this case, I'm really quite pleased with the softness of the bokeh. And so it goes to show that there's a pretty wide variation of performance that you can get out of the bokeh of this lens, and you really have to kind of use it to its strengths. So let's transition to looking at people for a few shots. So we're going to start by looking at it in a casual kind of setting. And so in this case, an advantage of an inexpensive lens like this, but one that has a larger maximum aperture, is that I was able to shoot at f1.8 and get, a nice clean looking end result, even in restaurant type lighting. Now, downside to f1.8 is that our girl here on the right is in focus, our girl here on the left not in focus. The depth of field is just too shallow. However, that could work to the advantage as well if you're wanting to isolate a subject in a place like this. Now, when it comes to people shots where you're not having to tremendously isolate the background, obviously that worked well here, and you can see that detail is nice. I think somewhere around f2 or f2.8. We'll take a quick peek. f2.8, as I thought. And so, you're getting a little bit more, eliminating some of the optical deficiencies and getting a little bit stronger detail and contrast. Now here's a shot more wide open because I did want to get a nice soft background, and I think that detail is held up really nice here, and you can see a nice blur in the background. Another shot here of my youngest, and so again, some strengths and weaknesses. Detail is okay. In this area where you're going to get more circular type things, the outlining is a little bit heavy for me, so it's not as effective in that as it is with a just softer and smoother kind of background, or where there's more distance to the background. Now, I did take a little bit more of posed type shots, more portrait oriented in some, settings that I thought would work well. And so, I mean, again, used well and then I think processed well, the RF 50mm f1.8 can actually do quite good. And so in this shot, I like the look of the shot in general. It's just using available light, good detail on the subject. The background blur, for the most part, looks quite good. And of course, it's a really inexpensive and convenient lens to bring along. Here's another shot. Again, I flattened the tone curve here just to give it a little bit more of a certain look. But again, here, bokeh is of less importance. And so you can actually stop down a bit and the lens can really pop because it does have really high detail if you stop it down a bit. Here also where I'm shooting at about f2.8, so I'm getting some depth of field, enough for my subjects, but getting a generalized kind of defocus to the background. And here's my favorite, and we're going to end on this note, in that it was a really great setting and that there was a lot of depth to it. And so with a lens that only has a maximum aperture of f1.8, if you want it defocused, the more that you can get depth in the scene, the better. But in this case, I was able to get really nice detail on my subject. And, while there still is some of the negatives, you can see some of the fringing, some of the more of the circling than what I would like. It's not dominating the image. And so the byproduct of this, I actually added a little bit of vignette to just kind of focus in on my subject. I feel like it's a shot that really works and that I'm happy with. And again, it's a really great looking casual portrait shot for, a lens that costs $200. So I think that we can probably agree that while there are some technical imperfections here and there in some of these photos, and obviously with any given focal length, in this case 50mm, it's not going to work equally well for all subjects. And that was pretty obvious when you're trying to get a little bit more in context. But I do think that for such a small amount of money, this remains a really significant value, particularly on the Canon RF mount where so many lenses are really expensive. And so a lens like this certainly has its purpose. And if you're on a tight budget and maybe you've got something like an RP or the original EOS R, or even, in this case, I shot it on the R5. But this is a lens that is easy to bring along, it's easy to afford, and it can produce some really nice looking images. Like most lenses, you need to use it to its strengths, and particularly with a less expensive lens, I think that you really need to use it to its strengths and become familiar with where its weaknesses lie, because you're going to get photos that you like better if you use it a little bit more wisely, because its weaknesses are a little bit more apparent in the photos. But at the end of the day, it I thought really worked quite well, and I came home with a number of images that I was really happy to have, and I think it did the job of documenting some of the things that kind of caught my eye over the course of that particular day. So maybe it will do the same for you or some similar application. Again, if you want to go back and look at the deep dive of the review itself, you can check out the definitive video review. You can also check out my text review, which I'll throw a fresh link to in the description down below. There will be some buying links there, and of course the typical links to follow myself or Craig on social media, or to check out the new channel, Letthelightin TV. Also linkage to become a patron, to purchase channel merchandise, and if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and let the light in.